The Taliban now have an interim government in Afghanistan. This comes exactly 1 week after U.S. troops withdrew from the country, officially ending our longest war to date. Meanwhile, Americans are preparing to mark 20 years since the attacks on September 11, 2001. Those tragic events led the U.S. to invade Afghanistan in an effort to defeat al-Qaeda and its allies, including the Taliban. Joining me now is Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker and podcast host Michael Moore. Michael, who recently launched a Substack, will also be hosting a free screening of his critically acclaimed film, Fahrenheit 9/11, this Friday at 9 p.m. on michaelmoore.com. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. You have said that you did not vote for Joe Biden in the Michigan primary. You voted for Senator Bernie Sanders. How do you think President Biden handled the end of the war in Afghanistan?
I was very moved by his courage, the fact that as a politician he would keep his word. He told us before the majority of the country voted for him that he would do exactly what he was going to do, that he kept his word and that he didn't back down. He didn't back. He was criticized. He didn't walk it back, stuck to his beliefs. And he got us out of there. He got 124,000 people actually out of there with, I just thought that this is the genius of a true commander-in-chief. Here, the Taliban were the enemy for 20 years, vicious enemy, probably like to kill a lot of Americans. And somehow he and his team decided or convinced them it was in their best interest to not kill a single American soldier or a single American. And every American made it onto those planes, with the exception of those killed by ISIS, a vicious random attack by the sworn enemy of the Taliban. But the Taliban themselves, the best example of this is the very last soldier who walked up the ramp of that C-130, the back end of the ramp. He walked up that ramp. There's no American soldiers behind him. There's nobody protecting him. Nobody's got his back. Oh, yeah, there you go. There he is. He's coming on board. The enemy was all behind him. No Americans to protect him behind him. Yet he was that confident that his commander-in-chief had guaranteed not only his safety, but the safety of these Americans. And he walks, instead of walking in backwards with his gun drawn, he walks forward knowing he was safe, just as all those Americans and all those Afghan civilians were safe. And there were, I think, something like some crazy number in those 2 weeks, 700 flights, and not one of them shot down. Everyone out. It was just amazing. The people that want to complain about this, complain about the mess he was handed, but at least acknowledge that he did exactly what he said he was going to do when he was running for office.
So let me ask you a bit more about that. Your film, Fahrenheit 9/11, questioned the Bush administration's reasons for entering the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And until now, George W. Bush's successors all made policy decisions that continued the Afghanistan conflict. What is your assessment of the nearly 20-year-long American occupation in Afghanistan?
I understand the people who say the mission was accomplished early on in terms of breaking up al-Qaeda so they would not plan further attacks against the United States. Bin Laden got out of there very early on, and then we stayed. For what? It was not the original mission to stay there all this time. President Biden was against this way back then, and I got an email from a mother of a soldier that died in Iraq. I'm sorry, not Iraq, but Afghanistan during this war last week. And she said, was his life in vain? Was his death in vain? What was the point of it? Why did I lose my son? And I wrote her back and I said, listen, here's my take on this. I'm sorry he was there. He shouldn't have been there. He offered to give his life for us, which all volunteer troops do. They offer to die so that you and I don't have to protect our freedom. We should never abuse that. We should never send them into harm's way unless it's actually about protecting our lives. And so he lost his life. And I said, but it wasn't in vain, because we will never forget him and the 2,500 other Americans and the tens of thousands of Afghans who died in this war. We will use it as a reminder that we never find ourselves in that situation again. And if he prevents the next thousands and thousands of deaths, if he had to die for that, it's sad that he shouldn't have had to die. But I won't forget him, and I won't stop my gratitude to our troops who were willing to give their lives so that there would be peace. It's not the kind of way I would go about if I had been the commander-in-chief of achieving peace over these last 20 years. But it is peace now in the sense that we aren't killing anybody and they aren't killing us. And thank you to all the people who served for that.
You know, we've had conversations here on CBSN with veterans who talk about struggling with those exact questions that you spelled out and the losses of their friends who died in Afghanistan. And now is a moment where they are watching the Taliban take back power. In fact, there's the interim government now. How might their government and leadership differ, if at all, from when the group previously controlled the country, you think, Michael, in the late 90s and early 2000s? Because, as we know, the stated mission for entering Afghanistan was to deny sanctuary to those who would harm the United States and harm Americans.
Well, the leadership and their policies may not change at all. We just have to accept that. The thing is that as much as we may not like the Taliban or what they stand for, what they do, they are Afghans, and we are not. It is their country, not our country. And they are going to have to sort this out amongst themselves. And if people don't like the Taliban, Afghans don't like the Taliban, then they will have to sort that out amongst themselves, like all people who feel oppressed have always done, have had to rise up and give lives. I mean, my, fifth great-grandfather was in the Revolutionary War of this country. My dad was in the Marines and served in the South Pacific in World War II. His brother, my uncle, was killed in the South Pacific during World War II. We all of us, certainly anybody who grew up in the working class, knows what it's like to have family members serving, being in harm's way, and losing their lives. And you never want to put them in that harm's way when it doesn't have something to do with protecting this country. That's the big mistake here, and we're just going to have to let them work it out. And I pray to God that they will do it in such a way that does not cause more death and destruction. And perhaps our incredible president, who negotiated not a single bullet being fired by the Taliban at us as we were trying to leave, and not a single Afghan killed by the Taliban at that airport as we were trying to leave. If Biden is that good, maybe, perhaps, he will find a way to have discussions with the Taliban, with that government in Afghanistan, and offer whatever help we can offer as peace-loving people, and perhaps make things a bit better. There are ways and things we can do. I mean, it is the United States. He is the president of this country. I think he possibly is already getting creative in trying to find further ways to protect the people in Afghanistan.
You know, some of the president's allies, as I'm sure you're well aware, have criticized him, though, for the leaving behind of those who helped American forces, that there are still, even now, some who helped the U.S. forces in Afghanistan. What would you say to some of those critics?
Did anybody think 2 or 3 weeks ago that we would get 124,000 people out of there? 5,000 of them Americans and 119,000 of them Afghans. I can't believe it. And I have to say that, I mean, look, I've never worked at the Pentagon, but my common sense tells me that there were not 120,000 Afghan translators in Afghanistan working for us. Let's just be honest, all right? So there were a lot of people, though, there who ran the government that we controlled for 20 years. That's what a lot of those people are. It looks like virtually all of them got out. It looks like all but 100 or so Americans who are actually Afghan citizens, who are from Afghanistan and who have dual citizenship, all but 100 or so got out. The president has committed and pledged to get anyone else out who wants to come out. But people were complaining about this and saying we're leaving people behind, and then all of a sudden the number is 124,000. That doesn't sound like people being left behind. That sounds like in any kind of chaotic situation at the end of a war that you lose, and we lost it as we define winning and losing. There's going to be chaos. There's going to be craziness. The fact that there wasn't mass slaughter, wow, that's just incredible. I have full faith in him. If Biden and his team keep doing the work they're doing, and you've got our Secretary of State over there today in Qatar talking to them, because they're the bridge to the Taliban. This is President Biden and our Secretary of State. I have a lot of confidence in them working this out. But to say that people got left behind, I'm shocked that we got out of there with our lives. And not just our lives, but the lives of 120,000 others. That's, I just haven't seen anything like that in my lifetime. It usually goes very, very bad. And it didn't go very, very bad this time. And props to him for having pulled this off, having stuck to his word. And you'll see he will get others. If there's anyone else there that wants to come, he'll get them out of there.
Our time is running short here, but I do want to get your reflections. Saturday marks 20 years since the September 11th terror attacks. What was your personal experience on 9/11?
I was out in Los Angeles coming back from the Emmy Awards, and I was supposed to be on the plane that was supposed to have landed. They came from here, from New York, and of course that was one of the planes that went into the towers. So that was how the day began, with family calling and waking me up. It would have been, I don't know, 6:30 in the morning out in LA. And I remember someone screaming into the phone, New York is under attack. New York is under attack. And my first thought was, yeah, New York's always under attack. What's the news, and why are you waking me up? And then said, turn on the TV, and I turned it on just in time to see the first tower coming down. And my daughter was an intern, worked just a block away from there, and just completely lost it, essentially. And then we tried to get a hold of her for about 4 or 5 hours until we were able to reach her. It was just an awful day. One of my producers that I had just worked with was on the Boston flight, and he died. So it was very personal on that day and the days after, and we couldn't, obviously the airport was shut down for the next few days, so we rented a car and took a trip across the country back to New York. And it was a very powerful trip. The Americans we spoke to, our fellow Americans on that trip, and where people's heads were at, it was illuminating, and it was powerful. And I prayed that it would not lead to more destruction, to more war. And unfortunately, that is not what happened.
It is hard to believe that it has been 20 years since 9/11. Michael Moore, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for having me on.